So you're in favour of keeping the decisions, political decisions, within the UK and not letting them be leaked out to outside bodies like Europe?
I'll be quite straightforward. That is the key issue for me. There's no other issue. It's just the ability of our country to make democratic decisions about our own future. In other words, to be independent. We fought a struggle in the 16th century to be independent of the papacy, which had control over countries, and we won our independence, through the struggles with the Spanish Armada and the Gunpowder Plot and all that kind of thing. And now we've lost it. The ability to make many key decisions in our country has been lost. But what I would say to you, Richard, is I'd go one step further, and I would like our country to adopt the Swiss model, which is about the most democratic system you can have on earth. Let me just briefly explain what happens in Switzerland. Every year the Swiss go to the polls, not to elect a government, but to vote on particular issues. And the current position in Switzerland is that I think it's a minimum of 35,000 people or 50,000 people. If they sign a petition saying we want to vote on this issue, the government is legally committed to hold one, right? And every year, Swiss people who are interested in issues, might be immigration, might be health, might be education, whatever it is, they demand petitions, and every year the Swiss vote on about 10 to 20 issues.
Really?
You may have come across the most recent one. There was a very contentious vote on immigration, and the Swiss voted something like 51% to 49% to have tighter immigration controls. But basically, this is perfect democracy, really. And one of the interesting things is that when they have those elections, there's a ballot paper with, what is your opinion on this question, on this question. About 80 to 90% of people go to the polls because they are making decisions. They're not transferring it to the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or the Liberal Democrats. It's called by the name of direct democracy, and that is surely the best model. The people are in control in a way that in the way that doesn't apply to any other European country.
I would add to that in order for that to function well, the people need to be informed of the truth.
Without
any media trying to obfuscate and fool them into.
Quite so. Which
I'm sure we'll talk about. Now, one way of protesting against European integration is to protest against their system of measurements in weights and in meters versus yards, etc. Now you use that to great effect in a campaign. Just tell us about that, Tony.
Well, the background to that is quite simple. At the very time I was appointed as Geoffrey Titford's secretary and setting up his office in Chelmsford, at that very point, the newspapers started publicising a regulation which would take effect on the 1st of January 2000. And the regulation was that from that day onwards, shopkeepers would have to sell goods in kilograms and not in pounds and ounces. So they would have to buy new weighing scales, and their customers would have to buy in kilograms and prices per kilogram, and they shopkeepers would have to price in kilograms as well. Not price per pound, but price per kilogram. And quite honestly, when I researched that, I thought, what is all this about? Hang on a minute, we've got a perfectly good system of weights and measures which we're all familiar with. The price per pound. We weigh our babies in pounds and ounces. We describe ourselves in stones and pounds. And I thought, well, what is all this about? And I then discovered that there were swingeing fines if you breach this regulation. Well, in October of that year, in October 1999, there were many big political meetings at that time about the European Union. It was very much the subject of debate. People would come out, 200 or 300 people to a meeting, and I met at this meeting a very robust, sort of typical English bulldog butcher called Dave Stevens. who was a butcher down in Leigh-on-Sea, and he said, you know, typical sort of English language, I'm bloody well not having the European Union telling me how to sell my, you know, my cuts of meat. I'm not changing my scales, you know, I'm not, my customers don't know what a kilogram is. And what then happened was that some trading standards official issued a warning saying, look, you know, if people want to be martyrs and defy the legislation, then they've got another thing coming, because we'll be after them, you know, we'll punish them, we'll fine them, we'll take their scales off and all this kind of thing. And Dave Stevens, the butcher, was all for open defiance. To cut a long story short, he right from the first week in January, the trading standards in Essex were after him and said, right, you know, you're selling it, you're still selling it meat in pounds, and your scales haven't been changed and so on. And they sent him a notice saying, you know, unless you comply within 28 days, you'll be prosecuted.
Right.
Your scales will be taken off you, all this kind of thing. And so we had a big rally down in Leigh-on-Sea. It's fascinating how these things took off, because we had the world's press came down at this event. It became a big kind of international event. We had Russian TV down there, and people from stations all over Europe. And so that campaign took off in January 2000. And looking back at the comment made by the Trading Standards officer had said, look, you know, if you want to make martyrs of yourself, go ahead. We'll tackle you. And so I said to Geoffrey, let's start a fund to help people who want to defy the legislation. And we set up something called the UK Independence Party Metric Martyrs Fund. Right. And opened a bank account. Very edgy to do so, because the European Union has got very strict rules about how MPs spend their allowances. Right. And Geoffrey Titford actually put his EU allowances and salary into setting up this fund. And to cut a long story short, the campaign took off in a major way, and we had traders all around the country defying the regulations. And the next thing that happened was that I was contacted in the UKIP office by Steve Thoburn, the greengrocer from Sunderland, who said, look, Tony, you know, I need help with this. And what happened there was Steve Thoburn had completely ignored these regulations. He hadn't changed his scales. Bananas 25p a pound, tomatoes 40p a pound, all this kind of thing. What happened was he had a stall in the Sunderland market, and at the edge of the stall was a bingo hall, right? And on every Wednesday they used to have bingo, and all these ladies used to traipse out of the bingo hall, you know, and buy his tomatoes or oranges on the way home, And so if you can imagine the scene, it's 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon, the bingo's finished, all these ladies troopsing out, you know, oh, well, you know, I'll buy a few bananas on my way home or something like that, you know. And so they're all congregating around his store saying, a couple of pounds of bananas please, or, you know, 2 pounds of tomatoes. And all of a sudden, 2 trading standards come down with 4 policemen, swoop on him and said, right, we're seizing your scales. So there's a major confrontation, you know, you're not seizing my effing scales and all this kind of thing. And basically these 6 officials, you know, physically, you know, manhandled Steve Thoburn, took away these scales. And the event was reported, and he came to see us, and on the back of that we decided we were going to support him and help him to resist through the courts. And so, and as a result of that, there was huge additional support for UKIP, because it was a very popular issue, you know. The way I saw it, Richard, was that this was the deliberate taking away of an aspect of national identity. You know? It didn't serve any purpose. This is how I saw it. It didn't actually promote trade within the common market. It didn't serve any useful purpose. But what it did do is disconnected us from our history. I mean, we devised this system of weights and measures, which, you know, went around the world with the Commonwealth and so on. And so I saw this as kind of part and parcel of a greater kind of move by the powers that be to disconnect us from our history, to kind of remove our sense of national identity and absorb us more and more into the European Union, or perhaps ultimately some kind of world government, one world government, you know, where all national differences were brushed aside.
Yeah.
And what then happened was that the researcher for the British Weights and Measures Association had been researching the rules and regulations on road signs, and what had been happening is various local authorities had been putting up signs in metres instead of yards. And to cut a long story short, through this work done by John Gardner, who's now, by the way, the director of British Weights and Measures, he produced some papers showing that quite clearly it was illegal